Let me break it to you like nobody ever has. Loving an unhealed dismissive avoidant is like bleeding for someone who won't even admit you're cut. You show up with your heart in your hands, and they show up with armor. You give, you reach, you hold space, you scream silently for connection, and all they offer you is distance, logic, and excuses wrapped in emotional frost. Loving an unhealed dismissive avoidant is emotional starvation disguised as loyalty. You think you're loving, you're showing up, you're staying solid, you're proving your devotion, but what you're really doing is draining your spirit while clinging to the hope that maybe this time they'll see your worth. Maybe this time they'll stop running. Maybe this time they'll open up, lean in, and finally love you like you love them. But listen to me, that day never comes. Not because you're not enough, but because they are wired to run, and you're standing in the fire thinking you're warming them up while they're just watching you burn. You offer softness, they flinch. You reach out, they freeze. You express your needs, they call it pressure. You try to connect, they create distance. This is not healthy love. This is emotional malnourishment. It's like pouring your soul into a black hole that was never meant to reflect anything back. You think it's loyalty. You think it's ride or die. You think that's what love is supposed to feel like. Intense, mysterious, broken, but romantic. No, that's not romance. That's a trauma bond. That's you getting addicted to the unpredictable highs and devastating lows. And it's destroying you while you think it's building you. They are not loving you. They are tolerating you until they feel too close, and then they vanish. Until they feel too distant, and then they breadcrumb. You're not crazy for wanting more. You're not too much for needing connection. You're a human being asking for what any healthy relationship requires: emotional availability, consistency, and safety. But they make you feel like the problem, like if you just had fewer feelings, fewer questions, fewer expectations, maybe then they'd love you, right? Maybe then you'd finally be enough. That's the lie. That's the trap. That's how you get emotionally starved while believing you're just being patient. You stay because you think this is what it means to be loyal, to fight for love, to stick through the hard times. But loyalty is not measured by how long you can ignore your pain to keep someone else comfortable. Loyalty is not supposed to cost you your identity. You are not being loyal, you are being depleted. And the person you are trying to prove yourself to has never even stepped into the arena of emotional depth with you. You're fighting a battle they're not even aware of, and worse, they're not even showing up for. They avoid hard conversations. They shut down instead of leaning in. They blame your emotions instead of facing their own fear of intimacy. And you keep shrinking your needs to fit their capacity. That's not love, that's emotional starvation. That's self-abandonment wrapped in a desperate hope that they'll change. But people don't change for comfort. People don't change because you love them enough. People change when they face their wounds, not when you carry them. You can't bleed enough to make them whole. And no matter how much you soften, they will not stay. They will only hover until closeness threatens their illusion of control, and then they'll disappear again. But here's the gut punch. The longer you stay, the more your nervous system gets addicted to this dynamic, to the push, pull, to the craving, to the hope. It mimics the wounds of childhood. It mimics the feeling of waiting for love that never quite arrives. You start believing that love is supposed to feel uncertain. You start confusing anxiety with passion. You call it chemistry, but it's actually emotional chaos. And the worst part, you think it's your fault. You think you're just not enough to make them stay. Let me break that lie right now. It is not your job to make someone feel safe enough to love you. If someone's trauma tells them to run when it gets real, that is their battle to fight, not yours to fix. You are not their healer. You are not their teacher. You are not their therapist. You are not their savior. You are someone who deserves to be loved freely, openly, and consistently. And the fact that you feel invisible, confused, emotionally drained, and constantly anxious, that's not love. That's trauma reenactment. That's your nervous system screaming for safety while you call it loyalty. The emotional starvation doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in. Slowly, subtly, they withdraw, you pursue, they come back, you feel hope, they detach again, you question yourself. This cycle becomes your normal. You start betraying your own standards just to keep the connection alive. You lower your needs. You bite your tongue. You pretend you're okay with scraps because you're terrified of losing the little piece of them you do get. But deep down, you already feel lost, because every day you're loving them is another day you're abandoning yourself. And maybe you've told yourself they just need time, or they've been through a lot, or if I just love them enough, they'll heal. But let me say this with fire. Your love is not rehab for their unhealed wounds. You cannot sacrifice your peace to fix someone who won't even admit they are broken. You cannot build a future with someone who keeps retreating into their past. And no matter how pure your intentions are, if they are not emotionally present, there is no relationship to fight for. There is only you breaking yourself to keep their illusion of connection alive. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to stop bleeding for someone who cannot even recognize your value. Loyalty becomes toxic when it costs you your voice, when it costs you your boundaries, when it costs you your identity. Stop calling it love if it only feeds one side. Stop calling it growth if you're the only one doing the work. Stop calling it loyalty if you're the only one staying emotionally awake. Because the truth is, the more you starve yourself for their approval, the more they take. And the more they take, the less you recognize yourself. This isn't romantic. This is relational erosion. It chips at your confidence. It corrodes your intuition. It poisons your self-worth. And it leaves you empty in the name of love. That's not what love is. Love meets you where you are. Love grows with you. Love communicates. Love takes accountability. Love shows up. If you have to beg for the bare minimum, you're not in love. You're in bondage. And I need you to hear me loud. You can walk away. You can reclaim your worth. You can stop settling for survival in the name of emotional loyalty, because the moment you do, you stop starving and you start living. You can't love someone into healing when their identity is built on avoiding intimacy. I don't care how patient you are, how soft you speak, how deeply you understand them, or how much you believe in their potential. If their entire emotional survival strategy is built on never needing anyone, you become the enemy the moment you offer connection. You become the threat the moment you offer closeness. Your love, no matter how pure, will feel like danger to them. Because love requires vulnerability. Love requires presence, and they weren't built for that, not yet. This is the brutal truth most people never want to say out loud. You can't outlove someone's defense mechanisms. You can't outgive their trauma. You can't outloyal their wounds. Some people have spent so many years, so many layers of their life, perfecting the art of self-protection, that the second you show them real intimacy, they recoil like you just held a flame to their skin. It's not because you're hurting them. It's because they have made disconnection their comfort zone. They don't see love as safety. They see it as a trap. They learned early, whether through neglect, betrayal, abandonment, or emotional suffocation, that closeness is dangerous, that needing someone leads to pain, that depending on others ends in disappointment. So what do? They detach, they suppress, they intellectualize, they become masters of self-containment. They don't cry, they don't share, they don't lean in. And when they do, it's short-lived, because the moment emotional gravity pulls them close, they panic. Their instinct isn't to embrace, it's to escape. And this is where your heart starts to break, because you see the flickers, the potential, the small moments when they open up, when they seem real, when it feels like the connection is mutual. But those moments don't last, because their nervous system wasn't built to sustain intimacy. It was trained to survive without it. So they sabotage, they ghost, they shut down, they pick fights, they punish you for trying to get closer, and you're left trying to glue together a relationship with pieces they keep ripping away. You think maybe if you just stay, maybe if you don't give up, maybe if you can just be calm enough, understanding enough, loving enough, they'll soften, they'll stay, they'll transform. But they won't. Not because they're evil, not because they don't care, but because their identity is rooted in avoidance. Their entire internal system screams retreat when it feels emotionally exposed. They don't even see it happening half the time. They're not trying to break you. They're trying not to break themselves. They're in survival mode while you're trying to build a future. And this is where you lose yourself. You start equating love with pain. You start mistaking emotional inaccessibility for depth. You think the more you chase, the more they'll see you're worth staying for. But love does not work like that. Real love requires willing participation from both people. Real love cannot be carried on one person's back. You are not meant to do the emotional heavy lifting for two. You are not designed to love for the both of you. You cannot show someone what love feels like if they're allergic to feeling. You cannot teach someone how to connect when their entire existence is about never depending on anyone. They will look at your intimacy like a threat. They will call your closeness too much. They will name your emotional honesty drama, because in their world, safety equals space, not togetherness. And the more you love them, the more they feel exposed. The more you care, the more they retreat, until you're left loving a ghost, someone who is physically there but emotionally miles away. You try to explain, you try to hold them, you try to talk it through, but you can't reach someone who is busy building walls while you're busy building bridges. You can't build a partnership with someone who is still trying to convince themselves they don't need anyone. You will always feel like you're begging for scraps of presence. You will always feel like you're chasing a moment of connection that slips away the second it starts to matter. And they'll keep telling you it's not personal, but it feels personal, because how can it not? You're loving them with your whole heart. They're loving you with a locked door. You're showing up every day, bleeding truth, craving closeness, and they give you slivers, controlled, measured, carefully managed glimpses, just enough to keep you holding on, but never enough to feel safe. And you keep thinking, maybe one more chance, maybe one more conversation, maybe if I just love them a little more. But you're loving someone who doesn't even know how to let love in. You're pouring into someone who's trying to stay empty just to feel in control. They've wrapped their identity around independence, around not needing, around being untouchable. So every time you offer love, they feel exposed. Every time you bring emotional depth, they feel overwhelmed. They don't want to be seen, not really. They want to be admired from a distance. That's the illusion. They want connection without vulnerability, closeness without risk, presence without pressure. But real love doesn't work that way. Love requires surrender. Love requires exposure. Love requires you to be seen, and that terrifies them. So no matter how much love you give, it won't land. Not until they decide to face their fear, not until they unlearn the lies they believe about closeness, not until they do the painful work of healing the wounds they buried so long ago. And that's not a journey you can drag them through. That's a door they have to walk through alone, willingly, not for you, for themselves. So here's the real punch to the gut. The more you love someone who fears love, the more you hurt yourself. The more you give to someone who cannot receive, the more empty you become. And it's not noble, it's not romantic, it's not destiny, it's destructive. Because love should not feel like chasing, it should not feel like convincing, it should not feel like trying to solve a puzzle you were never meant to finish. You cannot heal them with your presence. You cannot fix them with your love. You cannot reach them if they are not reaching back. And you sure as hell cannot keep abandoning yourself just to feel a moment of connection from someone who's made disconnection their identity. The truth is, if they don't face their pain, they will always avoid your love. And no matter how much you give, it will never feel safe to them, because love to an unhealed avoidant feels like losing control. And until they're willing to lose control, you will never experience the full version of them, only the fragments, the glimpses, the brief, shining moments followed by distance and silence. And you deserve more than that. You deserve love that stands still when it matters. Love that leans in, not away. Love that holds you without fear. And that begins the moment you stop trying to love someone into healing and start loving yourself enough to walk away. They don't run from you. They run from vulnerability. And I need you to hear that with every cell in your body, because the moment you take their distance personally, the moment you start questioning your worth, your value, your attractiveness, your sanity, you lose sight of the truth. You were never the problem. It wasn't your passion. It wasn't your desire for intimacy. It wasn't your need for closeness. What they were running from had nothing to do with you. They were running from the feeling of being seen, from the raw, unfiltered space where masks fall off and the soul is exposed. You stepped into their life with love, but they saw danger. You came in with openness, but they saw risk. You offered connection, and they interpreted that as entrapment. That's the twisted tragedy of the avoidant. Their entire nervous system interprets vulnerability as a threat. Not because you're unsafe, not because your love is flawed, but because long ago they were taught, explicitly or silently, that love equals pain, that closeness equals loss of control, that letting someone in equals surrendering their protection. So now, the moment you lean in, they lean out. The moment you start getting close, they instinctively retreat, not with logic, but with deep-rooted survival instinct. This isn't a game, this is survival mode for them. You become too real, too familiar, too emotionally powerful, and they vanish. Emotionally or physically, you wonder why they stop texting, why they suddenly seem cold, why they avoid the what are we conversation, why they get irritable when you express a need. It's not about you, it's about what you trigger. You are the mirror. You reflect to them the very thing they buried long ago, the truth, that they do in fact desire connection, but have no idea how to sit in it without panicking. And instead of facing that discomfort, they run because distance feels safer than honesty. Withdrawal feels safer than expression. Being strong and independent feels safer than admitting, I need you. And the chaos begins. You start chasing, you start overanalyzing, you start twisting yourself into a version that won't trigger their fears. You silence your needs just to keep the peace. You beg for crumbs and call it enough. And still they run, not because you're wrong for wanting more, but because they can't meet you there. They're not calibrated for emotional closeness. They weren't built for that, not yet. You keep giving warmth to someone who only knows how to process life in cold. You keep showing up fully while they show up halfway and call it effort. You may think, maybe if I tone it down, maybe if I don't say too much, maybe if I just give them space. But you can't shrink your truth to fit someone's fear. You can't cage your heart just to keep someone who's allergic to emotion. Every time you do, you betray yourself. And for what? For someone who flinches at the very thing you offer freely, love without armor. But they don't want that, not yet. Not because they're heartless, but because their heart was wounded long before you arrived. And now love feels like reopening a wound that never healed. So instead of healing, they avoid. They use logic to avoid emotion. They use independence to avoid intimacy. They use silence to avoid accountability. And the more you show up, the more you remind them of everything they are running from. You are not just a partner. You are a mirror. And most people can't stand to see themselves when they haven't done the inner work. They would rather break the mirror than face the reflection. And so they shut down, they ghost, they push you away, and you keep thinking, what did I do wrong? But the answer is nothing. You just got too close. You just touched a part of them that's still terrified to be touched. You thought love would be the thing that softened them, that your presence, your loyalty, your understanding would be enough to break through. But let me shake the illusion right out of you. You cannot hold space for someone who refuses to sit in it. You cannot build a safe container when they keep breaking the walls every time they feel seen. You think they'll come around, but what they're really doing is circling a perimeter, always close enough to keep you hoping, but never close enough to commit. That's not connection. That's control. And you're stuck in the pattern calling it potential. Potential is the most dangerous drug in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, because you see what they could be. You see the depth hiding underneath. And every small moment they open up, every brief look, every rare vulnerable comment, you get high on it. You think, see, it's there, we're getting somewhere. But no, that was just a crack in the armor. And the moment they realize they've been seen, they shut it down. Hard, fast, cold. Not to hurt you, but to protect themselves. Because to them, vulnerability equals risk. Intimacy equals suffocation, and needing someone equals weakness. They want connection, but only if they can control it. Only if they don't have to fully open up. Only if they can set the terms. But that's not love. That's a performance. That's emotional management, not partnership. You'll keep having conversations that go nowhere. You'll keep having moments of hope followed by waves of cold detachment, and you'll exhaust yourself trying to be enough to finally make them stay emotionally present. But presence is a choice. Vulnerability is a decision. And if they won't make it, your love becomes a sacrifice for nothing. You start to feel like you're too much, like your emotions are a burden, like your honesty is dangerous. But that's the lie their silence whispers into your mind. That's the illusion their avoidance creates, that love is supposed to feel distant, uncertain, unsafe. And so you adjust. You become low maintenance. You become the cool partner. You stop asking for anything real, and every time you do that, you shrink, you disappear. You abandon your truth just to stay attached to someone who fears the very thing you are emotionally alive. It's not your job to fix this. It's not your role to earn their openness. You are not responsible for melting someone's emotional ice when they built it to survive a storm you never caused. They don't run from you. They run from the intimacy you represent. The very thing you're giving them is what they're fighting against. That's not love. That's a war. And the only casualty is your self-worth if you keep showing up for someone who keeps leaving when it matters most. They don't run from you. They run from being fully seen. And the more you try to prove yourself, the more invisible you become. Because you were never supposed to fight for your place in someone's life. You were supposed to be met, matched, held, chosen. And the second you stop chasing someone who runs from love is the second you finally turn back toward yourself and realize that you were never too much. They were never ready. You think they're pulling away because they don't love you, but the reality is far more twisted. They pull away because they're starting to, because they feel something real. Because for once, someone got under their skin, because you cracked a wall they thought was indestructible, and now they're terrified. Not of you, not of your love, but of what that love awakens inside them. Need. Yes, need. The thing they've built their whole identity on denying. And now that you're here, now that they feel something they can't control, their survival instincts kick in full force. They run not because you're wrong, but because you're real. Real is terrifying to someone who lives behind armor. Real means risk. Real means exposure. Real means they can't hide anymore. You touch something in them they weren't ready to feel. Attachment. And instead of leaning into it, they back away like a wild animal that's just been cornered. Not because they hate you, but because love starts to make them feel out of control. And for someone whose identity is built around self-reliance, self-containment, and emotional distance, losing control feels like death. You think the silence means disinterest. You think the mood swings are rejection. But every time they begin to care, a war breaks out inside them. A war between their heart and their trauma. A war between who they want to be and who they've had to become to survive. You see glimpses of softness, of depth, of warmth, and then suddenly they're cold. You think it's about something you said, something you did, but it's not. It's what you trigger. You make them feel. And to someone who has lived their life numbing every emotion, feeling is panic. You showed them a version of love they didn't think existed. Love without manipulation. Love without chaos. Love without performance. And they don't know what to do with that because their nervous system only understands dysfunction. Their blueprint for love was written in pain. So now that you're here, offering consistency, offering presence, offering real partnership, it short circuits their programming. They start thinking, is this real? Can I trust it? When will it fall apart? When will they leave me? Because deep down they expect abandonment. They're waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're preparing for the storm even while the sun is shining because that's what life taught them. Never let your guard down. And the moment they feel themselves wanting you, needing you, softening in your presence, it activates every old wound they never faced. Suddenly, their independence feels threatened. Their autonomy feels fragile. And instead of moving toward you, they move away. Not because they want to lose you, but because they're afraid to need you and lose themselves. You see, to them, dependence is weakness. Attachment is danger. Vulnerability is exposure. So the more they care, the more they retreat. The more they feel, the more they hide. It's not logical, it's primal. It's the fight or flight impulse of a heart that's been shattered and never healed. You didn't do anything wrong. You just touched the part of them they've spent their whole life avoiding. The part that longs to be loved, held, seen, and chosen. And that part scares them more than anything else in the world. They tell themselves stories to justify the distance. I need space. I'm too busy. I'm just not ready. I'm not relationship material. But underneath every excuse is the same buried truth. They're scared to death of being known because being known means being vulnerable. And vulnerable means giving someone the power to hurt you. So they push you away, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. They feel it rising and they don't know how to control it. So they do the only thing they've ever known. They run. You think their distance is indifference, but it's not. It's fear. It's emotional paralysis. It's the panic of someone who has never felt safe in closeness. It's the reaction of a person who's never seen love modeled in a way that didn't involve betrayal, manipulation, or abandonment. So when you show up and love them purely, without agenda, without games, it destabilizes their entire worldview. They start questioning everything they believed about connection, about people, about themselves. And that confusion turns into withdrawal, not because of you, but because they don't recognize this version of love. They don't trust it yet. So they protect themselves the only way they know how, by retreating, by creating distance, by acting like they don't care. But inside, they're in chaos, wrestling with emotions they don't know how to name, longing for you but scared to show it, missing you but scared to need you, wanting closeness but fearing that once they have it, they'll lose themselves, or worse, you'll leave them. That's the contradiction. They want to be loved but fear what love demands. They crave safety but don't know how to receive it without sabotaging it. So what do? They downplay their feelings. They pretend it's casual. They act like they could take it or leave it. But it's all a front, a coping mechanism, a way to stay in control. Because the moment they let you in completely is the moment they become vulnerable. And to them, vulnerability equals pain. So they create the distance before you get a chance to hurt them. They leave before you can leave. They push you away before you can get too close. It's all preemptive pain management. And you're left confused, hurt, wondering why someone who seemed to care suddenly acts like you're invisible. You replay every conversation, you blame yourself, but the truth is, it was never about what you did. It was about what your presence activated inside them. You reminded them of the love they buried. You lit a fire in a heart that had gone numb, and instead of letting that fire grow, they ran for the exits. Because fire means warmth, but it also means risk. And they've been burned before. You didn't break them. You didn't fail them. You simply loved them in a way they weren't prepared to receive. You gave them a taste of something real. And that kind of love, it doesn't always get welcomed with open arms. Sometimes it gets met with fear, with resistance, with flight, because real love strips away the walls. Real love exposes the heart. Real love threatens the illusion of control. And not everyone is ready for that. They pull away because they feel themselves falling. And for them, falling is losing. Falling is weakness. Falling is surrendering their power. So they grip tighter to their independence. They fight the gravity of your love with silence, detachment, and withdrawal. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It means it was too real. And real is exactly what they've never learned how to hold without dropping it. They pull away not because they're empty, but because they're overflowing with emotions they don't understand. And instead of embracing the flood, they shut the dam, because that's all they've ever known: control, safety, distance. But beneath that hard shell is a heart that wants to be touched, that wants to be loved, that wants to let go. They just don't know how. Not yet. Not until they choose to face themselves, not until they're ready to stop running from what they actually want, and finally stand still in the storm of real connection. They will make you question your sanity, your worth, and your memory, not because they're trying to hurt you, not because they're evil, but because their defense mechanisms are so deeply wired, they twist reality without even knowing they're doing it. One moment, you're both laughing, connected, and everything feels fine. The next, coldness, withdrawal, dismissal. You ask a simple question about your relationship, and suddenly you're too much. You express a need, and now you're overreacting. You seek clarity, and they accuse you of starting drama. Slowly, subtly, they flip the script. And you don't even realize it's happening until your self-esteem is hanging by a thread and you don't even recognize the sound of your own voice anymore. This is not just emotional distancing. This is psychological warfare. It's the type of slow gaslighting that doesn't scream, it whispers. You begin to second guess your own perceptions. Did I really say that wrong? Am I too emotional? Maybe I do expect too much. Maybe I am too needy. And there it is. The crack, the seed of doubt they planted, even if they didn't mean to, has taken root inside you. You're now trying to be less yourself so they can feel more comfortable. You're now adapting your truth to fit their tolerance of intimacy. And that's the beginning of emotional erosion. You were clear when you came into this. You knew what you needed. You had boundaries. You had a voice. But after enough time with the dismissive avoidant, you start shrinking. You start playing small. You stop bringing things up. You silence your instincts. Why? Because their reactions are unpredictable. Because you never know when your words will trigger their shutdown. So you start walking on eggshells. You start packaging your emotions carefully. You rehearse before you speak. You become hypervigilant, analyzing every text, every pause, every sigh. And now you're in survival mode in a relationship. You are not thriving. You are managing. Managing their distance, managing their moods, managing your truth. And let's be clear, managing isn't loving. Managing is surviving. And love was never meant to feel like survival. You weren't created to suppress your emotions to keep someone else regulated. You weren't born to play emotional hide and seek with someone too afraid to meet you in the open. You weren't made to tiptoe through your own heart, afraid to speak your truth because they might leave. That's not connection. That's fear-based codependency. That's emotional self-abandonment wrapped in the illusion of love. You try to talk, you try to resolve, you try to meet in the middle, but every attempt at depth is met with deflection. You get responses like, why are you making this a big deal? Or, you're always emotional. They minimize, they dodge, they shut down, and it's not always loud, it's quiet. It's subtle. They disappear in the middle of emotional conversations. They give one-word answers. They shrug off your feelings. And that's what makes it so damaging, because you start to think you're the problem for simply wanting clarity, for simply wanting connection, for simply feeling things.